Coming from serious industrial shiftings of the 19th century, the 20th century became an era based on global military supremacy during and after wars, but not everything had to do with world power. To start us off, we are going to talk about a series of revolutions that were caused by the world's masses realizing it was time to ask for fair governments that preoccupied for the needs of the people. Going from Einstein's formulas or even the internet, they were all unimaginable events that brought us to the present today. The Revolution was the first to outbreak with the long-lasting ruling of the Romanovs, represented by Tsar Nicholas II, a bad decision maker for the Russian people. Russia liberated serfs to work as slaves. 80% of the population was poor, and with total defeat of the Russo-Japanese War and participation during the World War I, the country was devastated. It all started with the Bloody Sunday, a peaceful manifestation against the government that ended with bloodshed of innocents outside the Winter Palace. This made a super extremist group of Bolsheviks by Vladimir Lenin and moderated Menshevik group by Kerensky fight together against the Tsar's government on what we know as the February Revolution. Eventually, they separated and went against each other to decide over the Russian government during the October Revolution and Russian Civil War. Finally, after a couple of years of bloody fight between the Red Bolshevik and White Menshevik armies, Bolsheviks won, resulting in the establishment of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic or USSR in 1922. 2 years later, USSR creator Vladimir Lenin passed away, and Joseph Stalin became his successor, making his accomplished promise to make Russia peace. In 1910, the Mexican Revolution happened. This occurred mainly thanks to the President Diaz, due to his 60 years of power. Although he did make a lot of technological advances, he took the power from the people to choose their leaders, and he had an unfair land distribution between the rich. After a long period of Porfiriato, the power revolved to take him out of the power. When Diaz finally resigned, Madero, who led the revolution, became Mexican president. From this point, Mexican Revolution became a bloody conflict between leaders to take each other down. Later, Madero was assassinated, so in 1913, the Plan de Guadalupe was published by Carranza. In this plan, Carranza stated that he wasn't going to let Huerta get over the power and that he was calling for another presidential elections. Venustiano Carranza also did the Convention de Aguascalientes in 1914, a major military leaders meeting with the purpose to get to an agreement between the four characters who participated in Huerta's overthrow. When the Mexican Revolution was over, Obregón stayed president and in the power all during World War I. Chinese Revolution took place. It is well known for the Opium War and economical issues of the Qing dynasty weakening. That was the moment people came tired of the Qing dynasty and started looking for a leader. They found Sun Yat-sen, a Chinese revolutionary leader intending to turn China into a republic. He based his ideals on three main concepts: democracy, nationalism, and livelihood. The revolution was successful and he became China's first president. Meanwhile, the first republic was being experienced during World War I, and it was growing.
After this series of revolts, the world was greatly shaken by the beginning of World War I with the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. This gave birth to the conflict between Austria and Serbia, and in 1917, U.S. intervention decided by Thomas Woodrow Wilson, based on the sinking of the Lusitania, in which basically U.S. citizens were trapped inside. As war outcomes, the League of Nations was established in 1920. This was basically the Treaty of Versailles regulated Germany in order to never let this happen again. The Ottoman Empire was dissolved since first it was allied with Austria and Germany, and later had no other choice but surrender to the Allies. Due to the destruction and poverty conditions in which people lived after the Great War, masses were desperate for any solution, which gave birth to totalitarian regimes, in which radical leaders as Franco, Hitler, Mussolini, and Joseph Stalin came to be. In 1921, even China became communist when the Chinese Communist Party was created by Deng Xiaoping. And later on, conflicts between the nationalist and the communist parties gave birth to the Chinese Civil War. By this, China was weakened and Japan saw an opportunity to invade. Surprisingly, both nationalists and communists decided to stop the Chinese Civil War and fight against Japan, who in the end ended up exiting China, and this was said to be the beginning of World War II.
Hitler became the Aryan race hope. For this, he had to bend the arrangements of the Treaty of Versailles. Keeping using gyros for purification of the Aryan race became too expensive, so in 1941 the Germans opted for the final solution. That same year, the Japanese joined the war, and too confident with their military power, they bombed the Pearl Harbor. This was the greatest massacre in naval history. After this, the United States decided to join the Second World War. Germany was forced to surrender, and the leftovers were Japan fighting the Allied powers. Therefore, the United States needed to give an end to the war. They invested in nuclear weapons and tried on Hiroshima. This gave Japan only one choice: to surrender. World War II came to an end, and countries were once again left devastated. Are of great importance. Just first, computer by in order to describe Nazi code and the use of Einstein formulas to manufacture nuclear weapons. In conclusion of the war, Allied forces agreed to divide Nazi Germany between the United States, Great Britain, France, and the USSR. Just later, in 1948, the United were established. Differences between the United States and the USSR brought the world to a new kind of war, the Cold War. To protect and redefine who they were, the Western nations recognized them as allies and stated their objective, which was to fight against communism. Since Germany was divided, Berlin, the capital, was also divided into the East, communism, and the West, capitalism. Soviets wanted the capital for themselves and planned to invading it. The Berlin Blockade of 1949 was a movement to blockade. The Treaty of Rome was created. Italy and France vowed to use atomic energy peacefully. East Germany started the construction of a wall to divide the East from the West, known as the Berlin Wall. The tension between these countries were affecting other nations because the US and the USSR were indirectly facing each other through other nations. Taking as an example the Vietnamese and Korean Wars, in these two fights the US ended up leaving these two nations in disaster. Ho Chi Minh, which was the leader for the Vietnamese Revolution, fight to restore order in this nation. At the end, all countries were left with a lot of internal problems. We can see it reflected today in Korea. But in 2000, there was a temporary reconciliation between the North and the South. At the same time, in Burma, the important Aung San Suu Kyi started fighting, which she continues to do today, for peace and right of the people. She was inspired by the well-known Mahatma Gandhi, which was a leader in India. Moving to China, the actual president Mao Zedong began with the Great Leap Forward, his biggest campaign.
Going back to America, the Cold War was in its highest point with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Finally, after all that tension agreements started to come, the first Strategic Arms Elimination Treaty or SALT was created, in which regulations regarding the production of nuclear weapons were stated. In 1987, the US and the USSR also signed the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Agreement. In 1989, thanks to Mikhail Gorbachev, the Cold War was finally over. This caused the fall of the Berlin Wall and as well the end to the USSR. After this event, President Vladimir Putin was left in power. As a result of this conflict, European Union was formed. One extremely relevant achievement of this time was the development of Internet by Tim Berners-Lee. In 1993, Bill Clinton ordered a missile attack to Iraq after an attempt to murder the former president George Bush. Finally, in 1994, the North American Free Trade Agreement was established. While all these wars and conflicts were taking place, America was having their own internal movements. Martin Luther King gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. President Kennedy was one of the first presidents who signed an agreement to prohibit racism in America. On the other hand, we gave a major step in history and science when in 1969 Neil Armstrong was the first person to walk in the moon. Finally, Steve Gates revolutionized technology. Throughout this project, we have researched, linked, and analyzed the most significant events that happened during the 20th century. After having the opportunity to study the whole century through 3 parcels, we've acquired the knowledge required to relate several events that caused a chain reaction forward in time, even in other countries all around the world. We strongly believe that this century has been until now the most significant one in defining who we are nowadays. Most of the enemies analyses made during this time maintain a similar position. Economic situations are partially similar, and the attitude towards war and weapon development we can observe in our trade leaders is also a consequence of the 20th century. In conclusion, the phases and events that shaped the 20th century are also the ones that had a significant influence on shaping the 21st century until now.